The cardiovascular field really needs the extra mile right now because it's the leading cause of death and it's a very impactful disease that really needs to have their first type of medications for different types of genetic cardiac diseases.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode in our Cardiomyopathies Matter podcast series. Cardiomyopathy is a disease of the heart muscle that makes it harder for your heart to pump blood to the rest of the body. Over time, this condition can cause the muscle tissue to stretch, thicken, or become stiff, which can eventually lead to heart failure, irregular heartbeats, heart valve problems, and sudden heart stoppage. It is estimated that cardiomyopathies affect about 1 in every 250 to 330 people worldwide. However, because many people do not have symptoms early on, the disease is often not diagnosed. The EU Safe Hearts Plan wants to do something about that. In this episode, we move from the policy view to the personal story of Rogier Veltrop, a group leader and heart researcher at Maastricht University. He works to understand the fundamental processes underlying heart disease. Rogier found out at age 27 that he had a hereditary heart condition called cardiac LMNAopathy. This condition causes a serious type of inherited cardiomyopathy. Getting the diagnosis early saved his life, but it also meant his family members had a 50% chance of having the condition too. Rogier Veltrop, now 46, survived 4 heart stoppages and now lives with a donor heart. In this episode of the podcast series Cardiomyopathies Matter, Rogier stresses the importance of getting a diagnosis early. It can be the difference between life and death. He has clear messages for policymakers and urges drug companies to put more money into finding better treatments for people with cardiomyopathy. Listen to his breathtaking story.
I'm a scientist, a basic and translational scientist at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. So I work at the Cardiovascular Research Institute at the Department of Biochemistry, and I lead a group on the interaction between the cells and their environment. So we study how cells behave if we put them in the 3D and under stretch or under flow to really mimic the situation of the patient itself. I started having a cardiomyopathy about 20 years ago, while being a scientist as well back then, and just started to get tired. Walking long distances, walking up the stairs, all was getting very difficult and much more quick. I was tired, I was just fatigued all the time. And it was weird because I used to be a competing athlete. So I was in a volleyball team, practicing every day, so I was very active always. And after a few years, you cannot walk stairs anymore. So that's pretty much how it started. It went from a little bit fatigue to end-stage heart failure over a decade, and that was in small steps. So first fatigue, and then the top side of the heart, where the atria are, they started fibrillating, atrial fibrillation. A lot of people have that, but not at that age. So I was in my mid-20s when that started. After that, the lower side of the heart, where the ventricles are that actually pump the blood throughout the whole body, that was a problem. I had 4 times a cardiac arrest. And with that cardiac arrest, yeah, of course, that's very impactful. So you lose confidence in your body, and there's a huge burden. In a decade time, from fatigue to pacemaker implantation, ICD, I had shocks. I had a mechanical pump that's called the left ventricular assist device. So I'm living on batteries because my heart was unable to pump on by itself. After a decade, I received a donor heart, a heart transplant. So in the beginning, when I was fatigued, I was studying in the US. I went back to the Netherlands and went to my GP. And the GP said, well, probably nothing wrong because you're fit, healthy, young. So after the second time I returned because it was really getting worse. It was a real problem. So I went back and then they said, because of family history, go to your cardiologist, make a little heart movie like ECG and see if they can find something there. And they were able to find something there. And then I had to do clinical genetics testing. So they're testing my DNA. They found a mistake in the LMNA gene, and that is a very important gene. That was a problem that led to all the arrhythmias and problems with the heart. After diagnosis, you're a heart failure patient. So you get a label, and then they start with, okay, then the first thing we're going to do is to schedule a surgery for an ICD and a pacemaker implantation. And you get medication for your atrial fibrillation, so blood thinners. And you get medication to have your heart rhythm under control. So out of nothing, you get 3, 4, 5 different medications, and that increased, and the problems also increased. So there was a tough period of time. So you have to stop working. I did not go back to the US to finish my PhD back then. Everything is changing around you. What I can say now in 2 sentences, of course, that's over a period of time of 2 years. But from an active scientist who likes to sport, who likes to cook, who likes to be to go out with friends and have dinners, then you have restrictions by diet. You cannot eat too much salt. You have to restrict the amount of water you take. I wasn't able to sport anymore. I have to go to the cardiologist every month, and eventually even way more often, because I had a lot of atrial fibrillation. So I needed to be shocked to get the heart back into the rhythm. So that was, so the whole life was upside down. In the beginning, it was tough to accept. So the first 2 years, you see people in the street eating and drinking whatever they want. I was very active. I never smoked. I don't do drugs. I don't do, I was living healthy. And you see people doing exactly the opposite. And I was the one with heart failure. It took like 1.5, 2 years to accept actually that I was a heart failure patient, and it wasn't my fault because it's a inherited disease. Yeah, and after that, you just go with the flow because you don't have a choice. And when you don't have a choice, you just accept it. But you see people around you when you're mid to late 20s. In that period of time, it's a very important time. People get families, people get jobs, people make promotions at their work. So that's very difficult to accept because I was at home on the couch and just tired and just try to make the best out of it and be useful at home. But that was a matter of accepting. But when you actually have cardiac arrest, so your heart stops beating, right, out of nothing. And then once I had lunch, and then I just fell off the chair with a cardiac arrest. So the heart just stopped beating, and you wake up in the ambulance, and then you're in the hospital, you get another cardiac arrest. And then they say, okay, that was after the third cardiac arrest. They said, okay, you better go to another hospital because we are a heart rhythm center specialized in heart rhythm cardiology. But you need to go to a heart transplant center and see if they can help you. A few months later, I got a left ventricular assist device. That's a mechanical pump in the belly area, and it has a tube towards the aorta, and it's supported by batteries that you always have to wear. So you cannot take a shower, you cannot swim. You're completely dependent on electricity. Your life prognosis gets worse and worse and worse. Yeah, and in the end, my body deteriorated so much and declined in health so much that I'm 1.92 meters, but my transplant weight was 48 kilograms because my body was just gone. It's not able to stand up anymore. I was wheelchair dependent for a while. When I had my left ventricular assist device, I had that for 1.5 years. So I've been on the waiting list for my heart transplant for 1.5 years. And when I got transplanted, then everything flipped around again. After a few weeks, I was able to go home again, started cardiac rehab. And after cardiac rehab, it was Christmas. And after New Year's, I started working again. So that was in half a year time from doing nothing to be able to work again. So I have to build everything up, but I actually had to learn to properly walk again, right? Because I was wheelchair dependent, and now you just walk all day again. So it's weird what the body can take, what level you can do sports until the rock bottom of what you can be of physical health. And then now I'm very active again. I had a partner back then that I married with. That was a great support. Yeah, that was very, very important, because I think the people around you, that's so important, because you lose over half of your social life, right? Because I had friends with volleyball, but I couldn't play volleyball anymore. So of course, 1 or 2 or 3 people you still see, but the rest is just sport friends, right? They're not the people who come to visit you at home. You don't do a study anymore, or you don't work anymore. So you lose your whole social surrounding. Because of this disease, we also lost many family members. My mother and her mother she died. So my actual grandmother died in 1966. So I never knew her because I'm from 1979. We had several cousins, nieces, aunts, uncles that actually passed away because of this disease. A lot of family members died as well. So your inner circle is getting very small in a time that you perhaps need it most. Yeah, no kids. It wasn't on the high priority list anyway. But now the decision of having kids was actually made by the clinical geneticist and not by myself. And that is a weird feeling, because we might come up with the same answer, both that we don't have kids. You might come up with the same answer, but now it's decided for you that it's better not to have kids, because there's a 50% chance to pass the disease on to the kids. So, and then it would be, it's almost gambling with life, right? So, we decided not to have kids. Because everything what happens to you is physical, and the emotional part, it comes along with that. But that the emotional and the mental side of that is more impactful, perhaps that's indeed true. Because when you cannot make your own decisions, that you're always afraid to, for example, to go to sleep. Because when you go to sleep, you have a phase when you're not really sleeping, but like ready to fall asleep. And that moment, that was a very scary moment, because you lose control. And for yourself, you think you're losing control and you're afraid to die. But actually, you never had control, because the 4 times cardiac arrest that I did have was when I was fully awake. It's a realization moment that you never actually have control with a genetic heart disease. It can happen anyway. The fact that you want to work but cannot work, people have an opinion. For example, if you would save your energy all day for one time to go to the grocery store, to just do some grocery shopping, and that would be your highlight of the day, because you've been saving energy for that. And then you go for an hour, and then you go back at home. And when you're back at home, you're completely exhausted. And other people saw you at the groceries and then say, "Oh, so you cannot work, but you can go to the grocery shopping." Well, for me, that was the highlight of the day, right? So things like that happen. So also the pressure that can be from outside your own bubble is quite intensive. And when you know there is not a therapy, because there is not a single existing therapy for this kind of disease. So there is not a pill you can take or an injection you need to have, or there is no gene therapy available. So what can you do, right? You can just sit. It's your body. You cannot, if there is something aching on your skin, you just scratch and then it's away, right? So this is happening on the inside of the body. So you're very dependent on everything that your heart does, and it's so difficult to control. The amount of times that I have ventricular tachycardia, speeded up heart when I'm just sitting in a chair like I am now, then your heart goes 180 BPM. So your heart is actually doing top sports and exercising while you're in the chair. So you can imagine that it feels like you're just out of breath, and you can have that for hours, right? So it's that you just call the hospital, they send an ambulance, And then you go into the hospital and you feel for hours like that, and then they shock you or they give a certain medication to get back to the regular heart rhythm. And several times that I experienced that, and then you feel like, now it's good again. So my heart rhythm is back, so sinus rhythm. So it's again 60 to 80 BPM. Now I feel comfortable. And then you're home and starts all over again. They can go back to the hospital. So you're completely dependent on what kind of mood the heart is in. That's very difficult. And I think often underestimated. When people say somebody has heart failure, that's like the end of the sentence, right? My uncle has heart failure. Sure, but what you feel, what you experience in a day, that's different. It's not just saying the sentence that you have heart failure. It really impacts your life. There are several family members that actually have this specific gene mutation. So there is always having the mutation doesn't necessarily mean that you get ill. As when I just switch caps again and now I'm the scientist again, the gene mutation doesn't cause a disease. It's a second hit, as we call it. We call it a second hit. So there needs to be like an extra stressor. That can be a high mechanical load on the heart, top sport, for example. That could be smoking. There are so many reasons why a second hit can occur, but that is needed to actually trigger the problem while it's always hidden. It's always hidden in the heart, but it needs a trigger to actually see, to have the phenotype out, so to actually have the heart disease. That trigger might have been, with me, top sport. So it's always something that people are aware, you know it, but there are also people that don't know that don't have genetic testing. I think we are very fortunate that in this part of the world, genetic testing is quite common. But even within Europe, there are several countries, half of the countries, where or it's not reimbursed or is not offered in a way that you can do like screening of the people that might have a certain mutation or a specific DNA variant that leads to a heart failure. We are privileged in this part of the world, but even in this part, a lot of people still don't know if they are affected or not. The consequences of not having a DNA test is, for example, that you have unexpected and sudden death. And that, of course, that's a huge burden because you might survive because of CPR or people are there to help you. And I had that as well, that my ICD and the pacemaker didn't respond to my cardiac arrest. And people started CPR on me. And that's the reason why I'm still in this chair. So my ICD didn't respond. So you can still survive. But also, if you don't survive, your surroundings, friends, families, people that actually witness that, can happen in the bus as well. They also have an impact. So the impact generated by a problem like this, when people are not being tested, so you don't know. And if you don't know, you cannot have any precautions, which in a severe heart disease are needed. Differences: where you live. Do you live near the hospital? Do you have a cardiologist or a GP that actually knows specific cardiac diseases? That might create a huge impact. I have a rare genetic disease that is not well known in the cardiology field, although not how to prevent it. If you would live in a rural area or in another country where the distances to the hospital can be quite long, yeah, that's really significant impact on the chance of survival. And that's another reason why genetic testing is very important. If you know you have a DNA variant that can lead to a sudden death, you can take precautions also by warning other people, tell them what to do if something happens, and also to talk with a cardiologist or electrophysiologist, so who your treating physician is at that moment, that when you know it's a LMNAopathy or a titin problem or a desmin problem or whatever gene is affected, when you know all those genes, all those different genes have different signatures. So they all give a specific sign that there is, you can distinguish certain diseases from each other on an ECG, for example, or an echo. So that's why it's also very important to know what gene is causing your heart failure. policymakers can actually help a lot by including the patients, the patient associations, patient stories, not because of having a sad story to tell, but actually learn from the experiences that those patients had. So I had several issues by, for example, cardiac arrest, or I know how it feels to have a ventricular tachycardia. I know how it feels to have a left ventricular assist device. And I experienced several things that were not mentioned in the folder, for example, or in the information I received when things like that could have happened. Those are crucial points in awareness. And I think on the level of decision making, normally it's the cardiologist prescribing medication, which is perfectly fine. But a level of shared decision making is very important, because when you experience things, to communicate that with your cardiologist is very important, because the cardiologist knows the figures. They know the facts, the figures, what has been published. Cardiologist is fully up to date by that. But it's different than feeling that same disease. When you feel the same disease and you say, okay, I have a blood pressure lowering medication, I have a drug that actually lowers the blood pressure, then how do you feel with that? Because some people will take it and they just have to lie down because they get dizzy, and then the quality of life decreases as well. And if you don't mention that, you don't have a shared decision-making point. Of course, the cardiologist wants you to have a proper life as well, as good as possible in the framework where you are at that moment of time in your disease. So those things, policymakers can really learn from patients as well, not only from the scientist and from the cardiologist. I'm familiar with the European Safe Hearts Plan. I've been involved in the Cardiomyopathies Matter initiative at the national and the local level and at the international level. And I was very happy to contribute to the outline of the project and see where we can help, also from a patient, but also from a scientist perspective. I was lucky to be able to speak to MEPs here in Brussels, where you can share your story and actually advise people how to deal with this, advise people what is the latest update on genetic testing, for example. Europe works, as they should, with frameworks of several years, like 8 years, because you have to make like a financial budget for 8 years. Genetic testing from 8, 9 or 10 years ago is not comparable to current genetic testing. That's very important because it got way cheaper and it's also way faster. So now we can have under €1,000, we can have a whole genome sequencing, like we can read the full DNA, and then we can actually retrieve those information in 1 or 2 days. 10 years ago, it was 5 times expensive and 10 times more lengthy. So you cannot compare the preventive measures that we can take now by testing genetics of the patients. You cannot compare it to previous frameworks because science improved so fast and so much that we're talking about a whole different ballgame now. And it's needed that people are being tested and having the opportunity to get tested, because this actually saves lives. The Safe Heart Plans is a very nice blueprint of what should be done. To my flavor, I think that it can be more bold, because I think you have a limited amount of space, text and information to convey to the policymakers. And this is very important space, because I think living a healthy lifestyle is like an open door. It's very obvious. Everybody knows that. So it's a choice not to live and obey to those rules. What can be done more boldly is that we have to integrate, for example, current technologies into medicine, and we can even improve. But the first step that a cardiovascular health plan is launched and actually integrated into this Safe Heart Plan and to the health policy making in Europe is extremely important. But we should not forget that in oncology, every month there is a new drug in oncology. But the amount of drugs in cardiovascular field, approved drugs, I'm not talking about clinical trials, approved drugs in the cardiovascular field, there are barely any in the past few years. It's very difficult to target because the heart cells, the cardiomyocytes, don't divide. And that's a whole different strategy to cure those, to influence these cells. So it's very difficult. And while both diseases need their attention, of course, both horrible diseases, but the cardiovascular field really needs the extra mile right now because it's the leading cause of death, and it's a very impactful disease that really needs to have their first type of medications for different types of genetic cardiac diseases.
You've listened to an episode of the podcast series Cardiomyopathies Matter. Heart researcher at Maastricht University, Rogier Veltrop, told us the breathtaking story of being hit by a rare cardiac disease. Thanks for listening.